Well, let me begin this morning with a question. Would you say you are someone who has a good memory? You don't have to answer out loud if you don't want to. I feel I'm one of these people who has a memory for perhaps useless trivia and information, but if you ask me where I put my phone, wallet, or keys, I will not be able to tell you, give you the answer to any of that. But whether you have a photographic memory or a memory like a sieve or a goldfish, whichever illustration you want to use, remembering in the Christian life is very important. It's actually an important part of our spiritual lives as believers. We are a forgetful people. Even those who have been touched by God, even those who have been saved by His grace, even those who know Him, we can be so forgetful of all that He has done for us. Quick to forget. Perhaps too quick to raise our complaints and our frustrations when there's a plethora of blessings down the years. Now, the reason I talk about that is it's almost easy to forget. That part of the main purpose of Esther was to remind the people as to why they celebrated Purim, why they did this every year, why they went through the rigmarole, why do we do these things? It was to remember what God had done for them, to remember how God had saved them, how He had protected them, how He had preserved them. I believe that many reading Esther for the first time would be long gone before them, and so they would need to recall these things to memory. And as we go through this passage, finish this book together, these final verses, we'll see that the people remembered, we'll look at it in three ways, that God gave them relief or rest from their enemies, that He turned events in their favour, and finally that they remembered that one of their own, or two of their own, put it that way, had been exalted. Those who had humbled had been exalted. My prayer is that we think upon these things, that we too should be encouraged to remember, to record, and definitely to celebrate the work of God in our lives. To celebrate all that He has done down not just in our lives, but down the centuries. So lest we forget. We're not long off the back of Remembrance Sunday, are we? There's that phrase that comes out of our ears, lest we forget. Even more dangerous to forget what God has done, what God has said, how He has saved us, how He has blessed us, and to fail to give thanks and to celebrate and to rejoice. Now, firstly, they were remembering their relief or their rest. If you look at verses 20 to 22, verse 20 tells us that Mordecai recorded these things, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month Adar and also the 15th day of the same year by year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies. These wonderful phrases that we read. And as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts and of food to one another and gifts to the poor. They had relief from their enemies. David Strain, in his really helpful commentary, actually reminds us that this word really at its core means rest and peace, relief from their enemies. You often see that in the Old Testament. You go to Joshua, you go to Judges, or when there's battles all around and there's danger around, and then the victory is won and they have relief or rest from their enemies. A couple of weeks ago we looked at Jehoshaphat and that moment when they looked doomed from a human perspective. And Jehoshaphat prays that wonderful prayer, Lord, there's no way we can beat this horde coming against us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And of course the Lord wins the day for them. And eventually at the end of Jehoshaphat's reign, he was more or less a good king as far as a human could be a good king. And we are told that he was given rest all around him, rest from his enemies, relief in this way. And sometimes when we read these Old Testament narratives and accounts, I think Christians today can struggle to reconcile the experience of somebody in this position with the experience of a believer today. I haven't been in the position of Esther or Mordecai. I haven't been in the position of Jehoshaphat or David or whoever else with these battles going around. But that's why we read the Bible with the whole story in view, the whole Bible in view, so that we can understand what could that mean for me, or how can I sort of relate to this in that way? What is God saying? And we certainly know that we haven't maybe fought those physical battles here, but we need to keep the whole Bible in view, the whole story of salvation in view, because while we may not have rest and relief from physical enemies, though some have experienced that, we do indeed come to God and we find rest and relief and peace when we come to him and put our trust in him. What does Christ tell us? Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden and burdened, and you will find rest for your souls. Jesus promises more than just a cup of tea on the couch and Netflix. He promises rest for your souls, not just physical rest. That passage is talking about rest for your souls. Come to all who are weary and burdened. Relief from the burden of our own sin. Rest from our own sin, because Jesus bore the weight of our sin upon himself, bore the wrath for our sins on the cross and rose again from the dead. Because of that, we come to him weary and burdened, knowing our need for him, and we find rest for our souls. We find that his burden is easy, his yoke is light. We're free from the burden of sin and trying to work and earn our way to him, free from our own good works to try and find our own way to him. We rest in his finished work on the cross and in the resurrection, and we follow him from that place. We are the ones who have found relief from our spiritual enemies. As we thought about last week, the powers of darkness were defeated at the cross. We still fight the battle, as it were, but the war is won. We thought about that last week. We fight the daily battle. We don the full armour of God. The spiritual warfare is around us, but the war is won. Our enemies have been defeated and will ultimately be defeated when he returns. They're disarmed and they'll be ultimately destroyed. If we have found him, if he has found us, and we have been drawn to him, we can truly say we find rest for our souls in him. We find relief, we find salvation in him, as these people found salvation too. There are other times where we can say, yes, I am saved, but he has also given me a particular sense of relief and sense of rest from some kind of trial or darkness that we have been enduring. It seemed like it would not lift. This is not going away. And yet the Lord provided that relief, that rest, that peace, that salvation in a sense of being brought through something and being brought through a difficult trial or time, a dark valley that the Lord has seen you through in one way or another, and you can feel that rest, that relief from all that has been occurring around me. Or just at other times when he gifts you that sense of unusual joy or peace, relief, rest, and you don't really know why. It's just a gift that time. The Lord just give me this at the moment. And you are grateful. And you can say, in all of these circumstances, my sorrow too has been turned into gladness, my mourning into joy, as it was for those people there. Let's celebrate. Let's feast. Let's be glad for what he has done for me, for us. It can be easy, as I was saying there, to remember the frustrations or to think of the complaints, think of the things that aren't as we would have them be, and be so prone to forget the blessings. And the people of Israel had done this in their history before. Remember, as they came out of Egypt, they'd seen the miraculous signs and the wonders and defeat of the Egyptians. They'd seen the Red Sea, which is one of those biblical moments that everyone wishes they could have seen, doesn't it? You know, if you ever ask the question, which part of the Bible would you like to see? A lot of people will say, oh, I'd love to have seen the Red Sea. And they'd seen it all. And it's only, in our Bibles anyway, you go through Exodus, it's only a chapter or two later when they're already grumbling. It was better back in Egypt. They'd forgotten already. That's how quickly it all happened. And even as they come into the promised land, the Lord's preserved them through the wilderness. Moses is preaching to them, knowing he's not going to get to go in. He gets to see it, but he doesn't get to go in. And what he has to keep telling them is, remember the wilderness. You have to remember the wilderness. Remember how he provided for you. Record that. Don't forget that. Because when you had nothing, and he literally brought manna from heaven, he brought things from nowhere for you to eat and to drink, and the sole of your shoes didn't wear out, all that sort of things. He says, because remember, you're going into a land of blessing now. You're going into a place where it'll be fruitful, there will be abundance, there will be plenty. And the danger that came with that was that they would forget what happened before. And they would say, by my own might, by our own might, we have gotten here. And he says, take care, lest you forget. Lest you forget. And keep reminding them and reminding them and reminding them of this truth. And so they were to make this a habit because they were so prone to forget. Think of all the feasts they had. Think of all the celebrations, the Passover, all these things. Why? Because we need to remember what he has done. Because we're so prone to forget. And when we forget, it's not just like, whoops, I forgot to do that. It's no, we end up in idolatry and child sacrifice and temple prostitution and all these kinds of things because you forgot the goodness of the Lord and you were drawn away to other gods. Think of when they came across the Jordan. There's a wonderful moment that the Lord sees them over the Jordan and they're to leave those 12 stones, set them up and leave them there as a memorial. And he says to them, when years from now, he says, when your children ask you, when your sons, your daughters, and you're walking past those stones, and everyone's kind of beginning to forget about the Jordan, the parting of the river. He says, and your children say to you, what do those stones mean? I say, that was when the Lord saw us through the Jordan. That was when he saw us through there. Because they were so prone to forget, and so are we. It's why you walk around towns like ours and you see memorials to terrible things that happened. So that, because people gave their lives for this. Or some kind of memorial that, let's not get there. I remember hearing the story of after the Second World War, the American president at the time came across to Europe and he saw the concentration camps. And somebody said, what do we do? What do we do with these horrific places? And he says, keep them, preserve them. He says, because this cannot happen again. It cannot happen again. They need to serve as a reminder to protect us from ourselves. Because our hearts are so prone to wander, as we've been singing, and go to very dark places. And we sang in that song there, right at the start, Come O Fount of Every Blessing, where we see that in 1 Samuel 7, when they're saved from the Philistines. And it's one of those situations, again, where they're stuck. They're in a lot of trouble. And they, after the victory that the Lord wins on their behalf, they lay that Ebenezer, that stone of remembrance, here I lay my Ebenezer. and they say, for thus far the Lord has led us. He's led us as a people thus far, and he's done it again. And we see that in our own lives, don't we? See that in our lives as churches as well. We take the Lord's Supper, don't we? We're remembering, do this in remembrance of me. To remember our salvation, to remember what Christ has done. As I was saying there right back at the start of communion, Paul's saying, let me remind you what's of first importance. Because the Corinthians are just like churches today, right? We're quick to remember our own personal preferences and the things that bug us or the things that we love, and yet we can so easily forget the gospel. That's what the danger of Christians and our own hearts. Let me take you back to what unites you as a people. What brings us together? Christ himself. Let us be those who regularly remember how the Lord has given us relief, how the Lord is turning our sorrow into joy, our mourning into dancing, whatever the phrase might be. And as a church too, how the Lord has kept us. Alistair Godfrey reminded me that next year will be this church's 40th anniversary. And it's good to remember these things, isn't it? To celebrate these things. Like, we're still here. We're still here. And the Lord has kept us. We remember how the Lord delivered us from our enemies, how he has preserved us and given us relief in so many ways in our lives. And as we are remembering, even as we do at communion, we look forward to the ultimate rest, to the ultimate relief we will have. Relief from sin, sickness, pain, suffering that is ahead for us. They remembered how God had given them rest, relief, peace in this time, and they celebrated. And that celebration, interestingly enough, leads to sending of gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. God has so blessed me and been encouragement to me. I want to be a blessing to others and those who might need in some way, and that I can help and serve in some way. They remembered this relief. And I also want us to notice specifically how they remembered God's providence, how they remembered not only that God had given them the relief, but how through that relief they had experienced his providence over the situation and in the details, as we've been thinking so much throughout the book of Esther about God being kind of behind the scenes, but really at work to bring about his purposes. It says they had remembered, and they retell the story, don't they? This is what we're being retold here. The Jews accepted what they had started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. They sort of obey to say, we will remember. For Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast that is, cast lots, to crush and to destroy them. When it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plan which he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the term Pur, which therefore, because of all that was written in this letter, and of what they had faced in this matter, and of what had happened to them, the Jews firmly bind themselves and their offspring and all who join them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written, and at the time appointed every year, that these days should be remembered and kept through every generation and every clan, province, city. The days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among their descendants. And we've seen, specifically, I want to focus on that fact, that he had saved them through this, the details, in all the behind-the-scenes kind of way. Because these people have seen amazing acts of God, haven't they? They've seen the incredible. They've seen the undeniable act of God, unless you're really determined to deny it. He'd turned this horrible situation for their good, for their salvation, for their victory. But as you go through Esther, as you say, the name of God is not explicitly mentioned. The voice of God is not explicitly heard in that way. It's not the burning bush where Moses is hearing the voice of God. There aren't the visible miracles like the Red Sea or some angelic army rocks up to destroy their enemies. But that does not mean that he is there. That he's not there. So don't record that. That he is not there. That does not mean that he is not at work. That doesn't mean that he's somehow forgotten his purpose in their lives and in ours today. He had not forgotten his people. See, he had made a covenant with his people for one thing, and he was going to keep his word and keep his promise that there was always going to be a remnant of this people. That Christ himself would come from these people. He would not see them wiped out. But it also helps, doesn't it? Because I've never seen a Red Sea. I've never seen one of those incredible miracles. But that doesn't mean that God is not at work behind the scenes. And so much of it is for the everyday Christian, the non-Moseses or Esthers that are, the Davids and so on, that see these undeniable miracles. If you've not seen that, it doesn't mean that God is not at work in your life. I think I heard John Piper say something along the lines of, God could be doing 1 billion things in your life and you could notice 3 of them. Do you know, that's kind of how it is. He's always at work in our lives in ways that we can't see or we don't understand. And just because there aren't things that we can visibly see and point to and say, look at that miracle, look at that there, look at that, in the way that we want to sometimes, doesn't mean he's not at work. He's always at work for his people, as he was for the people in Esther's day. He's always at work in our lives. And this is not the first time we see this in the Bible, is it? When we can't see God and we can't understand what's going on in our lives, we often ask those questions. Now just imagine Joseph in Genesis, with everything that happened to him, the roller coaster that was his life, having this dream that all his brothers would bow down to him, and then his brothers chuck him in a well and sell him. It's not really lining up, is it, with a dream? Like, what was the dream? I'll just forget that one then. That obviously wasn't working, and then being brought to Egypt, and then going up again, and then being accused of a horrific sin, which he did not commit, being chucked into prison. I'm thinking, this probably isn't working out, the whole bowing down thing. I don't see how this is, I'm in prison again, what's going on? And then he's taken out of prison, and then he's lifted up, and he's able to save the people from a famine. And there's that wonderful conversation with his brothers at the end, who of course are afraid that now in his position of power he might, do something to them. But he tells them not to fear. He says, in that wonderful phrase, that you intended it for evil, but God intended it for good. that you might bring a people and preserve a people here as well. You might save this people, and that this line would be preserved. He could see it later, even if he couldn't see it at the time, that God was there and he was for him. And we see this here in the very way, on the day in which they were to be destroyed, turned out to be the day of their victory, and how they had mastery over those who sought to have mastery over them. They cast lots to crush and to destroy them. That's why it's called Pur, that is to cast lots, Purim, to crush and to destroy them. But it got turned on its head. The tables were turned, and they were defeated. The enemies were defeated and conquered, not the people of Israel. You can see God's sovereignty and his providence in the little details. I love that that they cast lots to decide it. Because when you read Proverbs, it says, the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. God's in the details, and he's sovereign over them. He knows what's going on. And nothing comes to pass without he willing it, ordaining it. This is what he does here. Haman thought he was in control, but really God was in control over everything and was working out his purposes and plans in the life of his people. In every area of our life. There's nothing too small that God doesn't see, doesn't care about in your life. This is I've just been loving as we've been going through this book together, is how powerful God is, yet how much he cares. And he stoops down, he sees everything. And how that's mostly demonstrated in Lord Jesus, isn't it? The eternal Word of God, the Son of God, who humbled himself and became flesh and dwelt among us. So we're thinking as we come into Christmas season, of course, coming up as well, we're thinking so much upon that. But there's nothing in our lives that God is not sovereign over, that he does not care about, that he is not working out, as we so often love to say from Romans 8:28. He works all things together for the good of those who love him according to his purposes, that they might be conformed to the image of his Son. He is using everything for his glory and for our good and for our sanctification, even when that's painful. But they remembered God's sovereignty and providence in this situation. And we see one of the ways we see that is just in the final point, is the exaltation, if I can use that word, the lifting up of two of their own. Throughout the Bible, if ever there was an evidence that God was still for them, that God still cared about them, it was how he took Queen Esther, before she was Queen Esther, this humble Jewish girl from humble beginnings, and makes her the queen. And how he takes Mordecai, her uncle, and makes him the right-hand man of the king. As we see this throughout this book, and these two characters. And when it comes to the end here, we see Esther, who's gone from being this kind of used woman chosen as his new queen, to having the authority to sign these decrees, to write counter decrees, given this place and this power, this authority to do these things. We see that there. Queen Esther bound them, and as they had bound themselves and their offspring with regard to their fasts and their lamenting, the command of Queen Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. She and Mordecai have been given this authority, and we read of where Mordecai is now as well, this guy that was about to be hanged on the gallows, who was lamenting in sackcloth and ashes outside the gate as he heard of what was going to be happening to him and his people. And here we have him in chapter 10 there. Mordecai is now in this position, was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with a multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. Those who have been humbled have now been exalted. Those from humble estate and background. Sometimes being faithful, sometimes maybe a bit more murky. I think Esther, there's a murkiness in the book of Esther where, was that the right thing to do, wasn't it? I don't know. But that's what it's like in real life, and sometimes real life as believers. But they've tried to serve him as well as they can, and they found themselves in this position where they have been exalted for such a time as this. As Mordecai says to Esther, in order to save this people. But that's the pattern with God's people. Often those are humble or exalted. We see that it's hard to read these verses and not think of Christ, the one who chose the way of humility, the one who humbled himself thought the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, was born in humble circumstances, humbled himself, took on the form of a servant. Would say things like the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And he was humbled to a brutal crucifixion, to the point of death on a cross, but was raised to new life. He was exalted and is now exalted at the right hand of the Father. And he has authority over all things. He's not, Mordecai's the second in command. Christ has authority over all the nations. And he will rule them when he returns. For us as his people, that is the way of the cross. It is the way of